Hello and welcome to This Week in Tyranny, episode 2, 26th of October 2015. So we're going to kick it off today with a discussion with Bernie Sanders. So let's see how this goes.
As an Englishman, I'm glad to see proud socialists running for president. Do you believe in redistribution of wealth?
Well, I think what's happened is there has been massive redistribution of wealth in this country for the last 30 years. The problem is it's gone from the middle class to the top 1/10 of 1%. And I think we have to redistribute it back to working families in the middle class so that they can have a decent standard of living.
The wealth from the rich and redistribute it to the middle class.
A little bit more complicated than that. But what we have seen in the last 30 years is the percentage of wealth owned by the top 1/10 of 1% double, while the percentage of wealth owned by the middle class has significantly shrunk to the tune of many trillions of dollars, and we have to deal with that.
So, as does often happen in political rhetoric, he starts off by brilliantly articulating the problem. I absolutely agree with Bernie Sanders. This is 100% a very real problem, the destruction of the middle class. His statements are true, his statistics are true, but what he has not acknowledged so far is the cause of this problem. And what he's going to lead you to believe is that this is just the general state of mankind. Left to its own devices, the rich get richer, the poor get poorer, and this is just how it works. What we need is a government to step in and fix this. Nothing could be further from the truth. The reason the rich are getting richer and middle class is getting annihilated is because of the expansion of government, crony capitalism, the Federal Reserve System, money printing. I think that I saw a stat the other day. It's something like the highest rate of return that a company can do. You can invest in R&D, you can invest in your workforce, or you can invest in lobbying. And lobbying, like by a factor of 100x, is the best return on investment for businesses. By dedicating a small amount of money to bribe politicians, those politicians will steal hundreds of billions of dollars from the middle class through their taxes and then redistribute it to the people who give the politicians a cut. This is the problem. It is the expansion of government that is causing this problem. And Bernie's solution, as you're going to find out, obviously, is socialism, is more government.
So would you believe in a wealth tax?
A variety of wealth tax. What I certainly do believe is that we have to have a strong estate tax so that when billionaires pass on, they don't leave all of their money to their kids and perpetuate a very distorted class society.
An expansion of inheritance tax. So obviously we're talking about increased theft, so we're talking about an increase in the amount of tyranny. That's his solution. So these kinds of solutions come out of a frame of mind that is common among socialists. Their idea that the size of the pie is fixed and they're just trying to redistribute wealth and redistribute the size of the pie to different people to ways they think are more fair. Now, nothing could be further from the truth on the freedom side. What they do is they try and increase the size of the pie. So the first fallacy is all this money that belongs to these rich people, where is that? Is that just sitting around doing nothing? And the answer is no. It's either being invested directly or it's sitting in banks and being lent out to other entrepreneurs, other business people. And it's very important to understand this. America's savings rate is the lowest it's been in about 4 decades. So one way or another, that money gets invested in plant and equipment and tools and invested in raising the productivity of every single worker in the country. Without that reinvestment in capital, then what you're going to see is a stall in the economy, a slowdown in the growth of the economy. And that's exactly what we've seen. And we've seen that primarily because of the destruction of the savings pool in the country. Now that's a result of zero interest rates, destroying the incentive to leave your money in a bank. The second way that it's going to actually shrink the pie for everybody, if you're old enough to have kids, then you'll know this firsthand. If not, you'll know that the way your parents feel about you generally. Parents are incredibly motivated to give their child the best they can. They're much happy to spend $1 on their child than themselves. And people really do save for their child to give them a leg up. Now, if you take that incentive away, what you're going to do is to see a massive increase in frivolous, destructive spending. I mean, if I'm, 80 years old and approaching death, and I know that all my wealth is going to go to the government, watch me spend it on hookers and blow. I mean, it will just go through the roof. Because there's absolutely no incentive to keep your savings or invest it wisely. You may as well blow it on frivolous fun. Not that there's anything wrong with hookers and blow, they're kind of fun. But it doesn't increase the productivity of the nation, it doesn't help the nation in any way, shape or form. What it does is it shrinks the pie.
I believe we have to end these tax havens that exist in the Cayman Islands and elsewhere, by which large corporations make billions of dollars a year in profits and just stash their money there and don't pay a nickel in federal taxes.
So how are you going to do that, Bernie? What the socialists have done in America is made it such a highly taxed, such an undesirable location to do business, that entrepreneurs are leaving the country and running their businesses elsewhere, setting up their businesses elsewhere, rather than correct the problem, which is to reduce the amount of theft that you're advocating and make it desirable for people to come back, rather than trying to win entrepreneurs back to the United States by just being competitive. No, what you want to do is you want to be more tyrannical. Let's create new laws. I don't know what you're suggesting. You're suggesting you go over and destroy those other countries? Do you want economic sanctions to make it difficult for them to accept the entrepreneurs that you've pushed out of your own country? Or do you want to increase the tyranny in this country? Forbid US citizens to have foreign bank accounts, to have foreign entities, to invest in other countries. You can go full Chinese if you like and go full capital and currency controls and forbid money leaving the country.
I think we need a progressive income tax so that we don't have a situation where, as Warren Buffett reminds us, billionaires end up paying an effective tax rate lower than truck drivers or nurses. So I think there is a lot to be done in making our tax system fairer.
Typical socialist wisdom. He wants a progressive income tax. You've got a progressive income tax, Bernie. That's the problem. The tax system treats so many people in such different ways that the people with the money lobby the politicians to give them special favors. You've just asked for more of the same. But don't worry, everybody, because this time if you vote for me, a good guy's going to get in. But here's the problem, Bernie. Obama sold them the same bill of bullshit. They just got burnt by a socialist who promised who was going to rein in the power of the banks and hurt the rich person. But of course the rich people just bribed him and he became their lapdog. He gave them massive bailouts. And you're going to be the same lapdog because you're going to get corrupted by the money as well. That's what happens when you expand the power of government to where it can take from some people and give to others. Every idiot gets elected on the promise of taking from the rich and giving to the poor, and every idiot when they get there gets corrupted and they accept the big dollars from the rich to offer protections for themselves and screw the middle class. America's not going to fall for it again.
I believe that we have got to raise the minimum wage in this country to a living wage, which I think is $15 an hour over the next several years. Real unemployment in this country is over 10%, which means to me that we have to create millions of decent paying jobs, and you do that most effectively by rebuilding our crumbling infrastructure, by hiring teachers, not by firing teachers. We need pay equity for women workers who should not be making 79 cents on the dollar compared to men. We need to especially focus on youth unemployment because Hispanic youth unemployment in this country is 36% and underemployment. African American unemployment and underemployment is 51%. We end up having more people in jail than any other country on earth.
Jesus, minimum wage again. How many times has it got to be proven to be incredibly destructive for the minorities, poor, and the youth? And then in the very next breath, you point out the victims of the current minimum wage laws, minorities and youth and their high unemployment. And then you try and say you're going to try and help them as well. You remind me of Inspector Clouseau, the Pink Panther, originally played by Peter Sellers and then by Steve Martin. Just this incredibly nice but incompetent human being who really admires his boss and tries to suck up to them and please them. And he's so incompetent and such a disaster that by the end of the movie, his boss is, I think, in a full body cast and on death's door or in hospital. He's got black eyes, broken noses. He's just been beat to shit by the person who was trying to suck up to him and help him. You're that incompetent fool, Bernie. You're standing on the backs of poor people, offering them a hand up. Give me a hand, I'll help you up. There's a great video on YouTube by black economist Thomas Sowell, and he points out a very important part in American history where inflation was rampant, and thankfully the politicians were so incompetent they didn't move quickly enough to change the minimum wage, and so the minimum wage became effectively irrelevant. And during that time, youth minorities employment was down to 10%. That is because these people, these youth and these minorities who get screwed by government-run education systems. There is nothing more evil and more destructive than government-run educational systems. They're extremely biased, they're extremely racist, and if you are a young minority in those systems, you are screwed. You come out of those schools barely able to read. You can barely add value to the economic system through no fault of your own, but by being a victim of government-run education. And now you're completely screwed. You're not worth $2 or $3 or $4 or $5 an hour. It's tragic. It really is tragic. It's not their fault, but it is the case. And the free market will step in and say, well, I can give you $5 an hour and I can teach you and give you the education you should have got at school. I'll give you that education on the job. And in a few years, you will be earning a living wage. But right now, because the government screwed you, you can't do that. I'm not willing to employ you because it'll be operating at a loss. You're only worth $3 or $4 an hour to me, sadly, because you can't contribute that well, because you can barely read. The fact is, after the government has completely screwed minorities in government-run schooling systems, the one chance and only chance they have of recovering those lost years and becoming educated enough to create enough value in the economy to where they can sustain themselves is if they get a low-paying job and the free market teaches them the skills that the government schools fail to teach them. And when you raise the minimum wage, you screw them out of that opportunity and you condemn them to a lifetime of unemployment and all the psychological misery that goes along with that. And in addition to that, you screw the productive world that you didn't screw in schools, and they actually do go on to get jobs and be productive, and their taxes go up so high, maintaining this welfare state, that it destroys the economy and eliminates any chance whatsoever that those poor people had a chance to lift themselves up out of poverty. This is all you causing that destruction, Inspector Clouseau.
You believe in postal banking?
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. In fact, I just spoke to a postal union this morning. I want to see our post office be reinvigorated. And one of the ways that I think we can help not only the U.S. Postal Service, but help a lot of low-income people. If you are a low-income person, it is, depending upon where you live, very difficult to find normal banking. Banks don't want you. And what people are forced to do is go to payday lenders who charge outrageously high interest rates. You go to check cashing places, which rip you off. And yes, I think that the Postal Service, in fact, can play an important role in providing modest types of banking service to folks who need it.
So once again, he brilliantly articulates the problem. Yes, poor people are getting screwed out of quality banking services that will give them the tools they need to lift themselves up out of poverty. I completely agree with the problem. But once again, he's failed to tell you why the problem exists. There's no question poor people need banking. Poor people would love to not have to go to payday loan sharks and pay exorbitant fees, obviously. The question is, why hasn't some entrepreneur stepped up and solved this problem? You've got the banks, right? But they've long since bought and paid every politician there is, and they pay for incredible amounts of legislation to regulate the banking industry. What that really means is legislation to protect them from competition. There's lots and lots of different services that entrepreneurs could offer those poor people at very, very inexpensive rates. But because they've got to satisfy all of the bureaucracy, all of the red tape, and they get the special privileged banking license that only the elite get, that only the politicians will give to their friends, entrepreneurs cannot step in and solve the problem for these poor people. I mean, look at this instance of food, right? There's some incredibly expensive restaurants, and those restaurants satisfy the needs of very rich customers. And yet there's an absolute torrent of restaurant and cafes and bistros and even grocery stores, no-frills grocery stores that cater to low-income people. That's because there's no regulation. There's no frickin' bureaucrat protecting poor people from the evil, bad, rich restaurants. So other restaurateurs just come on in and satisfy that market need. But because you've got all these do-gooding freaking bureaucrats who want to protect the consumer and the poor, ignorant, dumb person from the big bad banks, creating all this regulation, telling the banks what they can and can't do, but really that's all bullshit, just protecting the banks from competition coming in, you have this problem. So what's your solution? Is it to eliminate all of this protectionism and bureaucracy and red tape that the banks have bribed the politicians to put in place? No, absolutely not. All you want to do is appeal to a particular voting bloc, this postal union and all of their friendly unions, and you want to get them the exclusive privilege of being part of the big banking cartel as well. You're not in the least bit interested in eliminating the cartel. You just want to promise your constituents, your people, special privileges as well, at the expense of poor people. And if you have any doubt about this, watch the very next thing that he says.
So Walmart should get a banking license as well, for the same reason?
Right now we're focusing on the U.S. Postal Service.
Walmart's a great bank in Mexico.
Right now in the United States, we're focusing on the U.S. Postal Service.
Absolute contempt for the question. Really? Someone's helping poor people and I don't have to use tyranny, I don't have to use coercion, I don't have to steal money to do it, I don't have to divert funds to a broken and inefficient business model like the Postal Service? If he gave a shit about poor people at all, he would jump at the opportunity for the free market to just step in and solve their problem. He's like, what? Help poor people in a way that doesn't advance the cause of tyranny? In a way that doesn't increase my power and my influence? Why would I be interested in that? He doesn't give a shit about poor people. He just needs you to believe he does.
So bottom line here is you want financial institutions who are part of the communities, not as is currently the case on Wall Street, an island unto itself, whose only purpose in life is to make as much money as it can for itself, no matter how they do it.
I totally agree with you that these businesses and institutions and banks are just out to make a buck. They're not interested in how they do it. By the way, you're exactly the same. You just proved that with your last sentence. You don't give a shit about poor people. You're just out to meet your agenda. Here's the catch. The way to do this in a free market without tyranny, the only way you can do that is to solve somebody else's problem in such a powerful way, in such an efficient way, that you can charge them a relatively small fee compared to the size of the problem that you just solved. And people will voluntarily give you money. It is a win-win. If someone is doing a bad job at solving someone else's problem, then they will not make a dollar. So without tyranny, although you're acting, the reason those entrepreneurs give up time with their family and their children and their life to go to work and make a business and create a service to help poor people is for themselves. I totally agree with it. And the only way they can do it is to do it in such a way that the poor people thank them and want to give them their money. In contrast, your solutions are not win-win because they don't operate in the free market. They operate in the field of tyranny. You simply want to use the violence and the power of the state to create a win-lose. You're not talking about increasing the size of the pie. You're not talking about people creating win-wins. There's going to be a win-lose. You want to promise something at the expense of somebody else. Not only is it immoral, history teaches us that it backfires every single time it is tried, and the people that you tried to help end up worse off.